All right, good morning, everyone. Like Adrienne said, my name is Amanda Martinez, and I am the CPN committee member from Audubon Rockies. And today I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Susan Bonfield. Susan is the executive director of Environment for the Americas, which is a nonprofit based right here in Boulder, Colorado, whose mission is to connect diverse people to birds and nature. For more than 3 decades, Susan has worked internationally in bird conservation, leading collaborative efforts to protect migratory species and their habitats through research, outreach, education, and training. Specifically, she has facilitated the Western Hummingbird Partnership for the past 10 years with the support of the USDA Forest Service International programs. So this program brings together researchers, land managers, and conservationists from Canada, Mexico, and the US, and I'm sure Susan will talk to us a lot more about that. In 2018, Susan was awarded the Wings Across America's Outstanding Achievement in Conservation International Cooperation Award for her work with the Western Hummingbird Partnership. And Susan also holds a Ph.D. in the Human Dimensions of Natural Resources from CSU. Don't worry about it. So please join me in welcoming Susan to learn more about some of our favorite birds.
Okay. I was just asking why she whispered CSU. Is that a thing? Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I debated the title of this talk, hummingbirds, the pollinators, nature's unsung pollinators, quite a bit. We're not usually, the bird world's not usually at the pollinator conferences. So in fact, how many of you here are bird people? Oh, there's a lot of bird people. Why aren't you in your bird clothes? Like every time I go to a bird conference, people are wearing their bird shirts. I noticed Amanda's got on her great bee skirt and her bee, shirt and everything, and I've got my my hummingbird necklace on. So I didn't identify you. So I'm glad to know that there are already friends out there who can support this talk. I've been thinking that the butterflies need their last bee in the title with birds. So we hope to be more involved in pollinator conferences and workshops in the future. I know that a lot of you have probably had long-term research projects or education programs, and you know that you develop a relationship to a place where you are, where you're working, where you've done your research, or where you're spending your time. And I want to introduce you to a place that I'm going to call my meadow. And I know at least one other person in the room knows where this meadow is. But this meadow is up in the mountains. It's a meadow where I spent about 10 years running a bird monitoring station back in the 1990s, which really dates me, right? So it's when you get to a place where you've spent that much time, you know every little nuance of it, you know where the trail is, you know how to get there. You do it in the dark sometimes because you've got to be there early, especially if you're running a mist net station. This is called the Alfred M. Bailey Bird Nesting Area, and it's located in Summit County, Colorado. It's at 9,500 feet in the Gore Range Mountains. It's beautiful, and as its name implies, it's known as kind of a hot spot for birds. And you can see the kind of layout of the terrain there, the meadow in the middle and another meadow off to the side with spruce fir on one side, there's aspen on another. Hard to find if you don't know where it is because the trail doesn't actually take you into the meadow, it takes you past the meadow. It was named for Alfred M. Bailey, who was the Denver Museum of Natural History ornithologist. And although I don't know if he ever went there, but he did write 2 volumes, the 2-volume book on Colorado birds. But the Denver field ornithologists found the place, and it has become a popular place for birding and for visiting to see all the birds that come there. So in the spring, as the snow melts, you get Wilson's warblers, fox sparrows, and of course, hummingbirds. The challenge with hummingbirds, and I think why we're not quite up to speed with the bee and the butterfly world, is that research on hummingbirds is actually pretty late in coming. It wasn't until like the 1990s that there started to be research on the conservation and behaviors of hummingbirds, particularly migratory hummingbirds, in at least North America. And so we have a lot of gaps in knowledge, which is why the U.S. Forest Service felt the need to start the Western Hummingbird Partnership, is that there just wasn't much information about Western migratory hummingbird species. And so, as we think about in the pollinator world, at least from the bird perspective, we think, oh, where are the birds in this picture? Where are the hummingbirds? We're not mentioning them enough. Is it because there's so many more bee species? Is it because bees have such an impact on agriculture? Is it because monarchs are so easy to see and to identify? What are the reasons? And I don't think you can put a number or a metric on that. I think that really we just haven't been there with the information on hummingbirds and their value in terms of pollination. And that's definitely something that the birding world needs to work on and to change. There are thousands of plant species that rely on hummingbirds for pollination, especially in the tropics and in the mountains where insects are more scarce, up high. And many flowers have evolved with hummingbirds. So if you think about the beautiful red flowers with long tubes, those have evolved with hummingbirds who use them depending on the size of their beaks. And they're, just the amazing connections that they have. So in my meadow, every summer when I go out there, 10 years or 30 years ago, however long that was, we didn't study hummingbirds. We put up our mist nets, and when a hummingbird got caught in the net, we released it. We didn't have the tools to look at them. We didn't have a data sheet. The banding lab didn't really accept information on hummingbirds except maybe as a note. So there was nowhere to really contribute those data unless you were doing it independently. And at that time we were more concerned about what was happening with some of the other species of birds that we were studying up in that site. So I want to make sure these are the two species of hummingbirds that frequent that meadow, the broad-tailed hummingbird on the left and the rufous hummingbird on the right. And I'm sure you're familiar with them. If you feed hummingbirds in your yard or if you see them out there, you know that the broad-tailed hummingbird is one of our most common breeders, and our rufous hummingbird is one of our most dynamic and feisty little visitors. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. All right, so I want to make sure you know who Environment for the Americas is, because we'd love to be more involved. We are known for our coordination of what's called World Migratory Bird Day. I know that some of you do that. I met my friends at Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. It's a program that brings people together across flyways in a celebration of the phenomenon of bird migration. And it's been an amazing program that has grown over the decades. We now coordinate it globally with the United Nations Convention on Migratory Species, the African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement, and the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. So it's now a global event that we work on together to develop conservation themes and messaging throughout the year. And next year is a perfect year for everybody, and I'll give you a little sneak peek because we haven't announced it, but we will be focusing on the importance of community science to bird conservation. So it plays well into all of our work. We're built on 4 pillars of work. One is our Bird City program, or our community conservation programs, and we coordinate this in Colorado and in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is a program that motivates communities to get together within their communities with leaders, with organizations, individuals, to work towards creating safe spaces for birds. So to become a bird city, you have to complete criteria in 5 areas, including like habitat protection and reducing threats to birds. This has been a great program that also benefits bees and butterflies. We also do early career training. We work with up to 200 early career, college-age student and recent graduates, also veterans and other military dependents, bringing them into the field of research, science communication, conservation, land management, working side by side with our partners at the National Park Service, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and other federal agencies and non-governmental organizations. We also do locally, if you want to join us at any time, bird walks and other education programs. You can come to our holiday event in December. We'd love to have you. And we work on hummingbirds through the Western Hummingbird Partnership, and also butterflies. We do have a monarch project, and we're part of the tagging team that's going on right now in Texas. So we've got monarchs making it across the border. We're located, if you know the area, by the monster truck gas station at the top of, Adrian, your battery's running low. At the top of El Dorado Springs. So give us a call, come visit us. Was Adrian around? Tell him he just got a message that his computer's battery is dying. So I'll talk fast. Anyway, Amanda gave the presentation part on the Western Hummingbird Partnership. We were selected by the U.S. Forest Service international programs to run that, and we focus on 7 Western migratory hummingbird species. But I will say that our iconic species is the rufous hummingbird, and we use that as our icon because the rufous hummingbird is, for one thing, so amazing. It has the longest migration. It migrates up to about over 3,000 miles one way. It is easy to identify, at least the adult males. So it encompasses the ranges of all of the other hummingbird species. It is also in steep decline. So we use that as our iconic species. For those of you who aren't familiar with this report that came out 5 years ago, of course, the 2.9 billion birds lost report, which indicates the numbers and groups of birds that have been affected most deeply over the years. And once again, what we notice is that hummingbirds tend to be left out. And again, we don't have that much information. So in this report, there's no mention of hummingbirds. But you can extrapolate from this that if many of these other groups are declining, especially like the insectivores, because hummingbirds are actually insectivorous as well, that they're part of this decline in bird numbers, at least of adult bird numbers. At about the same time, one of our partners and one of our Western Hummingbird Partnership Advisory Committee members, Christine Bishop, and her student, Simon English, did this incredible work studying the breeding bird surveys. And if you're not familiar with breeding bird surveys, these are annual surveys taken to look at numbers of breeding birds across the country. What they found was pretty dramatic. And so what you see from this graph, you can look at two components here. One graph is not bordered in black, and the other is. And those represent 2 timelines. So for example, if you look at the blue part going up above the x-axis, that's Anna's hummingbird. You'll see that on the left, that represents the time period from 1970 to 2019. And the similar blue graph on the right represents a shorter period of time, a decade, 2009 to 2019. This shows that almost all hummingbird species are in decline. And with the steepest being Allen's hummingbird on the far right, with the steep red lines going down, and next to it, Rufous hummingbird with its steep declines. The only species that are increasing appear to be Anna's hummingbird. Well, actually, that is the only one. There is, in the last decade, even a slight decline in ruby-throated hummingbird, which was quite a surprise. Now, that is an eastern species, so we don't focus on it, but we do keep an eye on it. There's a lot of work going on in the bird world trying to figure out how do we change this trajectory. And since the 3 billion bird paper came out, that was it. Bird populations, that was real. The bird populations have continued to decline. Not across all groups. There are some groups that are doing better. Waterfowl, for example, with protections from hunting groups have actually done pretty well. But groups like hummingbirds continue to decline. So if you were to look up here and to see those two charts that I had up there about 30 seconds ago, you would have seen something what we are calling tipping point species. And the rufous hummingbird and the Allen's hummingbird are both considered tipping point species. That means they've lost 50% of their populations in the last 50 years, and they're expected to lose, since 1970, well, it's about 50 years, and they're expected to lose 50% more in the years to come by 2050. That's a lot of birds lost. In fact, most people say that if we aren't able to achieve something for a species like the rufous hummingbird, they could disappear before our eyes, and we wouldn't even know why. So we have a dilemma here. How do we get as much as we can done as fast as we can, like with this computer? Right.
It's not mine.
But you don't like Macs, and I've got a Mac there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Western Hummingbird Partnership is doing to fill some of those gaps in knowledge about migratory hummingbirds. We have a lot of projects going on looking to study their behavior and the threats to their populations. So I want to take a minute to talk about that rufous hummingbird migration. And I'm sure you're all familiar or generally familiar with a map of the Western Hemisphere. So we're going to start in Mexico. And rufous hummingbird actually goes down pretty far down into southern Mexico, all the way down into like Chiapas. And there are even resident populations of rufous hummingbird down there, but you probably won't hear about it because everybody thinks about the migration of the rufous hummingbird. But when a rufous hummingbird leaves Mexico, it flies up and it starts to curve over towards the coast of California. So it gets there and then it starts moving up the coast of California. So here's our rufous. I'll mention just a few of the other lists that it's on. It's on every watch list, species list, IUCN even species list, which is fairly big for that. I didn't remember to mention this though. It does make the longest migration by body size of any bird in the world with that 3,000 miles, and it's such a small bird. It weighs about the size of a penny. So if you can imagine, I know that when we're out at the banding station and we're handling birds, people are like, oh, be careful with it. I'm like, well, this bird flew through storms, it flew through wind. You have no idea where this hummingbird's been. So it can do that. The other thing I find fascinating about this hummingbird is that it has been name called every name you can think of. I've seen it called feisty, pugnacious. It's been called a bully. In one article, it was called an extremist. So this poor hummingbird, it's like it's working so hard, you've got to cut it a little slack because it's fighting literally for its life. Right. So this is the migration that I was explaining to you, but it's better to see it visually. So here comes our hummingbird. Yeah, you like this? Oh, y'all are appreciative, aren't you? What a nice crowd. But it's such a long migration, and we talk with our partners all the way up in Alaska on little islands out there, and they get these rufous. But then when they come back down, they do this kind of incredible circular migration where a lot of them are coming back down over the Rocky Mountains. And that's when you see them coming through Colorado, going back through New Mexico, then back into New Mexico. And it is our superhero bird. Now, what is it facing as it comes up? And that's what we're concerned about. And that's why we work internationally, because what we know about birds is that to conserve a bird, you have to consider its entire life cycle. We can't just protect it on the breeding end if it's not doing well on the non-breeding end. For one thing, if, for example, on the non-breeding end, it's not getting the resources it needs, it may not make it through migration. It may not have the fuel it needs to complete the journey. It may not have the resources it needs or the body resources that it needs to actually produce young. So unless we're working with our partners in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, we aren't sure if we're only working on our part of the world that we're going to actually help the bird. So couple of things here. I'm not going to present all of the threats because they seem to compound, with the years. When I first started in this field, we were worried about, habitat fragmentation, and that was a big thing. Today, wow, the list just keeps growing. So this is the list right now that are some of the top impacts for hummingbirds in Mexico, at least one of them, and that is this crop, which is avocados. Now, avocados are native to Mexico. They're actually very culturally significant. They're associated with strength and virility. And I think even other groups that came into Mexico adopted that feeling about avocados as well. But the avocado industry has exploded, and with that has come extreme deforestation. The situation is really complex in Mexico because of the money that it brings. It's also creating a lot of illegal deforestation and illegal planting of this crop. It's also bringing in the cartels, who of course want to have control over it. So it's a dangerous situation in Mexico for the people who live there, and it's a dangerous situation for migratory species like the broad-tailed hummingbird and rufous hummingbird that were depending on these habitats to overwinter in Mexico. It's the Hass avocado. That's the avocado that's coming out of Mexico, and 81% of the exports are coming to us here in the United States. You might not hear about this threat, but hummingbirds are also considered love charms. So one of the ways of doing that is to carry dead hummingbirds in your pocket or to have them. It's supposed to make you more attractive to the opposite sex. And so the illegal wildlife trade has actually increased. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been finding more and more of these charms, even coming across the border and into the United States. So that's problematic. I know that one of the last times I was in Mexico, I was talking to someone, and he said, when he was a boy, the hummingbirds used to roost in the corn stalks. I had never heard this story before. By the dozens, there would be tons of them. And at night, hummingbirds go into a kind of torpor when it gets cold. They just really shut down. And so they would go out into the fields and actually collect all these hummingbirds as they were in torpor, which was a lot of hummingbirds. I had never heard that before, and I don't know if that's still a practice, but certainly this illegal wildlife trade and using hummingbirds in that way is problematic and untracked as well. Take this a little bit farther, and now we're into the United States. So remember I said that we were going to kind of follow the coast. We think what hummingbirds may do, at least depending on where they're coming from Mexico across the border, is that they might follow the Salinas River up towards the coast. That river starts down, goes from east to west, and it's a good corridor. It has water, and then it has vegetation along its sides. The challenge is it is now called the salad bowl of the Americas. So it's the place where we get our nuts, our fruits, and our vegetables. It's huge. So the agriculture that you heard about in the previous talk, that's what's happening there, in many cases all the way up to the river. So these hummingbirds are not only faced with the loss of habitat that they need, but also the intensive agricultural methods that include those heavy chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, and all that are sprayed on those crops. We did a project also in the Angeles National Forest where we looked at fire and its impacts on hummingbirds. Fire really plays an important role in the life of a hummingbird from Mexico to the US and Canada. So actually fire can be a really good thing for hummingbirds. It opens up, if you were to think about my meadow, it's one of those things that keeps the meadow open. It keeps trees back. And when you don't have fire, trees start to grow in, so they can start to invade the meadow space. This Sarah fire was a big fire, and fires are becoming more frequent, they're becoming more intense. But in this area, we did a project with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, and they've been flying this for years. So they fly what's called this plane that carries these airborne infrared imaging spectrometers. And basically what that's doing is flying back and forth over the area, taking these kind of pictures that you can then look at, and what you can do is figure out what the vegetation is. Fortunately, they had flown this fire area before the fire and continued to fly it after the fire, which was an amazing opportunity to look at fire restoration. So we went in there, and for 2 years, we did all these bird surveys. Have you ever been to the Angeles National Forest? Oh, yeah. Well, did you hike there? Really? Okay, it's known as the steepest national forest in the country. And so I went out there thinking, oh, we're going to do our point counts, and we're going to set them up, and we're going to go. You can't do that. It's so steep, and the soil is so unstable that you have to stay on roads and trails to do your surveys. So all these dots that you see are different survey routes, but they are not where we initially thought we would be going. But we did lots of surveys, and we also did a special focus on hummingbirds. And what we found is that the hummingbirds that we observed, these over 179 observations, over 50% of the foraging was on 2 species, and that's black sage and yerba santa. Now, black sage is a salvia, and when we did another project in Arizona, we found the same thing. Salvia is definitely a favorite group of plants for hummingbirds. The other thing we learned is that this community of salvia, this black sage community, is a preferred way to forage because it has, like one bush has tons of blooms on it. So the rest of the time, after they feed on black sage and yerba santa, also with, you can see a lot of blooms there, they go out and they feed on the rest of the stuff out there. But time and again, we see hummingbirds protecting territories on like single big blooming bushes. So it's a great thing. What we worked with the Forest Service there was that black sage is one of the early recovery species after fire, which is a good thing for hummingbirds, but difficult given that fire continues to increase in frequency as well as in intensity. All right, so our hummingbird's coming back down, and Adrian's wondering when I'm going to finish. But one thing I want to point out is we have in our head this circular migration of rufous hummingbirds, but the amazing thing about rufous hummingbirds is they're actually almost everywhere across the country. In fact, a lot of them will go up to Alaska, and then they'll fly over to Florida, Alabama, and the southeastern states. We don't know why. But it was I'm actually originally from Alabama, and one of the early hummingbird banders, one of those first, I think I said there were about a dozen banders, Fred Bassett, got a call from somebody saying, oh, there's a weird hummingbird here, and he went out, tracked it down, banded it, and that hummingbird came from one of the banding stations, went back and went to one of the banding stations in Alaska. So some of the hummingbirds, the rufous hummingbirds, are doing that. You'll also find them in New Jersey and other eastern states. They might be expanding their range. Who knows? We'll see what happens with their migration. So I'm going to take you back to my meadow, but I'm going to take you back in winter. And this is what it looks like. It's probably one of the best ski places, I think, in the state. I shouldn't tell this many people that, but you still don't know how to get there, right? So snowpack is another critical issue for hummingbirds and other bird species and wildlife. Now, up in that little neck of the woods in the meadow, we have our own little community science project where we've been measuring melt-off since, I don't know, for a long time. One of the neighbors is really into it. And so every year we have a snow off the meadow contest. And you can guess when the snow is going to melt off the meadow. And what you see from this is that the snow is melting off the meadow, and you don't need a graph to figure this out, earlier and earlier every year. And this is something that's echoed in different places. Now, the problem that creates is that flowers are also synchronized with snowmelt. So I'm going to switch now to broad-tailed hummingbird, the little frenemy of the rufous hummingbird. And what you notice is that in some locations, this flower, the glacier lily, is one of the first flowers to bloom at snowmelt. And you can see it, the little stalks coming up at the snow's edge. And then it makes this beautiful yellow flower. Well, when hummingbirds come back to that mountain meadow, Often there's still snow on the ground. They might even depend on sapsucker wells for the sap that they can use while they're waiting for flowers to bloom. But they will forage on these glacier lilies as they first come back. And that's the first resource they get and they need to survive when they first arrive. And they've made that big journey back from Mexico. This is broad-tailed. So as they go in to the glacier lily, that pollen comes off onto their beaks, their throat, top of their beak, all sorts of, on their heads sometimes. And as they fly around and move around, they're pollinating. The next flower to bloom is the dwarf larkspur. And this is the flower that keeps it going while it's nesting and raising its young. So this is a very important flower, and actually it's thought that the hummingbird is the primary pollinator of this species. And then it moves on to some of the other blooming plants like penstemon. And I got to thank David Inouye, a researcher in Crested Butte, and the other folks who've donated these amazing photos for us to use. In Crested Butte, they've looked at how many flowers are available on these stalks, and you can see that over time, the number of flowers is declining. This is because of what's happening with climate change is that we have what's called a mid-season drought. So when things dry up in the middle of the season, just as hummingbirds are, finishing up nesting or maybe still at the end of nesting, that impacts flowering. And as you get into the later stages of their time in the meadow, there are not enough flowers on each of these stalks, or at least not as many as there used to be. So the impacts of this early snowmelt are that the flowers are blooming earlier. What is the big problem with that? And of course, we're worried about phenological mismatch. Are the hummingbirds coming back in time to get the flowers? From the studies in Crested Butte, it looks like the hummingbirds are lagging behind the flowers. So glacier lily is blooming 9 to 18 days earlier, and the larkspur is blooming 9 to 17 days earlier, but the hummingbird's only coming back 1 to 6 days earlier. So depending on how that continues and how much bigger that gap gets, this is going to be a challenge for hummingbirds. Will they switch to other plants? Will there be other flowers that they can use? And so that's a big, I think, still an unknown for us. So here's my meadow again. This is more in the summer. And you can see that issue that I talked about before, which is these encroaching trees. My meadow's getting smaller and smaller. And that's a challenge for hummingbirds. In Mexico, the way these meadows are kept open is, if you're familiar with the Mexican system of land management, they have what are called ejidos. And the ejidos, which are community-driven land management, it's land management driven by communities. So you have people deciding how they'll manage these land, but many different groups. It's like if your neighborhood took on Boulder or something. What they do is they do prescribed burns, and these prescribed burns in Mexico have actually created a number of the meadows that birds use in Mexico during the overwintering season. Our meadows, for example, up in the Gore Range, are not managed that way. There haven't been prescribed burns there. In fact, fire has been suppressed for so long that we pretty much call this the Yosemite of Summit County. When it goes, it could go big. So I'll bring it to a conclusion because there's so much to talk about, and I know I've gone a little bit over my time. But yes, there are many challenges that hummingbirds face, and the change and synchrony of plants is one of the biggest challenges hummingbirds will need to adapt to in the coming years, especially those that are making long-distance migrations, like the rufous hummingbird and the broad-tailed hummingbird. Intensive agriculture and the pesticides and chemicals that impact hummingbirds as a result are also, we feel, a big part of that. And in addition, One thing I mentioned earlier, but I want to emphasize it again, is that hummingbirds are insectivores, and they depend on those insects for the protein they need, especially during the breeding season and for feeding young. So if they don't have those insects, they're also impacted, just like other insectivorous birds. So we're all related here. And then, of course, more frequent fires and that mid-season drought. What we're doing now is we had a huge work session and we ranked all of these threats, and we worked with over 80 organizations from Canada to Mexico who participated in this effort. We looked at it from the point of view of just along the flyway, not considering the country, and then we took a look at it from a country-by-country basis. Did Mexico have different priorities than Canada, for example? And we came up with this ranking, and that is how we're focusing our work, at least in the coming years, is to focus on these priorities of how we want to address the situation. So we have a lot going on right now. One of the things we're trying to do is encourage people to publish their work. There's a lot of data out there that you've never seen before, and we need it to help inform our work. We are developing an IUCN Hummingbird Specialist Group. So this will be developed by representatives from Canada, the US, Mexico, the Caribbean. Of course, one thing I forgot to mention is that, I don't know if you know about hummingbird populations in the Western Hemisphere, but there are more hummingbirds the farther south you go. There are over 360 species of hummingbirds, and we've only got 17 of those breeding in the United States. So it's not a very big proportion of the overall group. So definitely we need the input from our partners to the south. Cellular tracking technologies, if anybody out there is doing monarch tagging, we're also looking at that for hummingbirds, and we have a student at UC Riverside who's looking at how those tags could impact hummingbirds in flight. Can they carry them, and can they carry them long distance? If you're interested in a hummingbird workshop, we'll be hosting one in August 2026 in Sedona, Arizona, and it'll be a great opportunity to meet folks. And we continue to refine and add to the first hummingbird conservation plan, which we developed about 1.5 years ago. We've also got a feeder study. We continue to support research by some of our collaborators when we can, and that includes by co-writing proposals and helping to manage the funding or supporting in any other way possible. And we have a fire committee that is working to look at how we can improve fire mitigation and post-fire restoration for the benefit of hummingbirds. Our Bird City program will also continue to grow. It always feels heavy with a hummingbird. These are little birds and these are huge problems. And so how are we going to ever get where we want to get with their conservation? And so it does feel daunting. And so I like to bring up this parable, which comes from an indigenous group in Latin America, and it's the parable of the hummingbird. And the way it goes is that there's this huge, huge fire out there, and all the animals are like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Should we run? Should we stay? Should we fight it? What should we do? And so all these animals get together, and the rabbit hops in and says, oh, no way, I'm too small. There's nothing I can do about this fire. And the squirrel comes in and says, yeah, me too. I'm used to nuts, not fires. I can't do anything with this fire. And then some of the bigger animals are looking at it. The wolf comes in and says, I just can't do anything. It's too big of a fire. I don't have any way of putting it out. And the bear's like, yeah, me too. Can't do anything, we better run. But then in comes the hummingbird. And the hummingbird comes carrying a single drop of water and drops it on the fire. And then it heads back, comes back with another drop of water. And the animal's like, what do you think you're doing? What are you doing? You can't put out a fire that way, drop by drop. And the hummingbird says, I'm doing what I can. So to conclude, I invite you to be a hummingbird and to do what you can. Thank you.
Thanks much, Susan. Actually, while I transition to Zoom for our next speaker, I think if anybody wants to help take a couple of questions from Susan, I'll hand you the mic.
Okay.
And then
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious,
No, it's U.S. and Canada. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, she asked about the 2.9 billion birds lost, and if that was for the entire Americas. And no, it's not. It's for the United States and Canada. Latin America and the Caribbean don't have some of the survey methodologies going on that we use in the U.S., like the breeding bird survey, so they don't have those data.
Thanks. What's the lifespan of a general hummingbird? Can they learn within their own lifespan to go somewhere else during a visit?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. And a general hummingbird, what is that? Just kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, we don't know. What we do know is, like, this year was a weird year for hummingbirds, and we were getting calls from people saying the hummingbirds haven't come back, the hummingbirds haven't come back. We think they crashed, and then they showed up. So we think it was kind of a cold, wet spring last year. We think they slowed down, and then they showed up. But some didn't show up in places where they used to. So, like, one of our partner researchers in Canada said, yeah, they came back, but they didn't come back to this place. So I don't know. And they don't know either. It's something we'll have to see, and it's hard to track, too, if you don't know which hummingbird was where. So until we see they have high site fidelity, so hummingbirds are used to going back to the same place. Until we find a hummingbird that's relinquishing a site and going somewhere else, we probably can't answer that. One more.
Over here.
Yeah.
I want to put in a plug for the
sorry.
Colorado Bird City program. We recently certified Boulder, and it was a wonderful process to work
Wait, where's
with
the speaker?
with
Thank you.
with Environment for the Americas. Can you tell us the top 5 things that we can do here to help conserve and protect hummingbirds, those of us who are just here in this room in Colorado?
Sure, you want the big things or the really easy, low-hanging fruit? Okay, yeah. But really quick. Okay, so really quick, 5 things. First, take care of them at home. Be really careful if you're feeding hummingbirds. Keep those hummingbird feeders clean and changed. That fermented water can kill a hummingbird. Please, 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 if you have beautiful big windows that you like to look out your windows, make sure that birds can't hit them. There is a window tape you can put on them and really easily prevent that. If you're not going to do that and you like your windows, don't put plants by them. Keep the birds away. Keep your cats indoors. And don't use chemicals, please. Those are harmful to hummingbirds. And work locally. Get involved locally in things that are going on. Try to get rid of chemical use in your community. That is a big one for hummingbirds. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you so much for being flexible with us, too.